Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Big Data London webinar. Today, we're focusing on the impacts of big data on cloud, hybrid cloud, and multi-cloud environments. So I'm Andy Steed, Content Director of Big Data London, and I'm joined today by Chris Santiago of Unravel Data. Hello, Chris. If Chris looks familiar at all, it could be that he was a presenter at a Big Data London conference last year in November. So these sessions are designed to be interactive. Please send in your questions at any point, and I'll endeavour to ask as many as I can once Chris has finished presenting. But without further ado, I'd like to get onto the main event. So over to you, Chris.
Great, thanks, Andy. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Andy, can you see everything okay?
I can, yep. Perfect.
All right. Thanks, folks. So a little bit of intro. My name is Chris Santiago. I am the Director of Solutions Engineering over at Unravel Data. A bit of history of myself. I've been in the big data space for going on six and a half years now. Started off as a application developer. So, and from then on, moved on, started managing Hadoop infrastructure, and most recently, selling big data technology on top of on big data. So most recently, at my endeavor with Unravel Data, I've been primarily focusing about a year and a half of my time really helping customers navigate through that cloud journey, whether that be choosing between a hybrid environment, just a single cloud, or maybe even a multi-cloud environment. Really using some of the best practices that I've learned working with some other customers and really helping ultimately have customers have success from whatever cloud journey that they still choose. In terms of the customer base, I've worked with a number of verticals in terms of healthcare, retail, financial, large enterprise customers with thousands of nodes, all the way down to your mid-sized customers that maybe are starting their big data journey from within the cloud itself. So today's topic, the impact of big data in cloud, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments. And so I'll be walking you through a couple scenarios. What I'd like the audience to walk away from after this conversation is really truly understanding, hey, what are your options? What are the pros and cons of the cloud providers and also some of the technologies that you can pick from within the cloud itself? Once we have an idea of that, then I want to get more predictive. How can we find an approach how to get you to the cloud? Whether you're on-prem today or maybe you're just starting your journey, we'll go ahead and define a plan that will ultimately make you become successful in the cloud architecture that you choose. So first off, before we go into anything further, in my years of experience working with a number of folks, I've seen a lot of cloud endeavors be very successful, and I've also heard of some things that fail. And so what I'd like to do is at least give you some of the best practices that I've seen in both scenarios, so that way you can ultimately become successful. So for customers that have truly have gotten tremendous value out of their cloud architecture, is they really truly separate and embrace this concept of compute and store. And so for the folks that are coming in from an on-prem world, you're always bound by the nodes that you buy for your infrastructure. So that node may have a finite amount of disk, a finite amount of compute resources, whether that be vCore and memory. And say, for example, you are disk bound. You have no choice but to add more nodes. And so for cloud customers, being able to truly separate your storage layer from your compute layer, now you can be really resourceful. So I can continue to grow my data volumes and not worry about adding unnecessary nodes, and vice versa. And so cloud customers that embrace this separation of compute and store end up really getting maximum ROI on their investments. I also see successful cloud deployments that really move away from this multi-tenant type of architecture. What I mean by that is in your on-prem clusters today, it was this idea of having multiple use cases working into your environments made sense, because me as an organization, I may spend significant amounts of money on hardware, and so I would want to make sure that if there are resources that are not being used, I can go ahead and deploy that for some of my other tenants. The challenge with that is if everybody needs to use resources, then you get into resource contention states. Mission critical applications start missing their SLAs. And so where the cloud becomes very beneficial is where I can actually set purpose-built clusters that are use case driven, right? So instead of just having this monolithic cluster, I can go and, for example, take my data scientists who use heavy Spark, move them into a Databricks model. And so they can go ahead and do whatever they want to do with that particular cluster. But I may have a separate cluster that's doing my batch jobs, and it's and that's up. And so anything that the data scientists may do has no effect on the cluster itself, on the batch cluster itself. So customers who move away from this multi-tenant architecture, are really taking advantage of what the cloud brings to the organization. Successful cloud deployments really take advantage of this, this elasticity component from within compute itself. And so again, coming from that on-prem architecture where when you're adding more hardware, you always want to add as much as your maximum state, right? Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be at that maximum state, 24/7, 365 days of the year, but that's what you need to do. And so what you see is instances of your existing resources not being fully utilized. And so where the cloud really starts making sense is, hey, pay as you go. I may only need additional compute with, say, for example, I'm a retail company, and I need those exist. I need more resources during the Christmas shopping season, and then I can scale down afterwards. And so folks that not only understand that that's something that we can do in the cloud, but then also embrace that from within the use cases that they're driving in their organization, ultimately sets them up for success. And then finally, this is an important one, using the cloud, especially for organizations or new use cases that haven't been available for customers today. So whether that be, is there an IoT, Internet of Things use case that can help maybe drive additional product, additional revenue for your organization, those type of things, or doing some, deep learning, machine learning algorithms. So natural language processing, all of that stuff that would be pretty hard to do from your on-prem environments. This thing opens up for new opportunities for your organization. So again, folks that really embrace and understand the advantages that the cloud brings ultimately provide success for the organization as a whole. So this is some of the best practices. Let's talk about the other way. So I've also worked with customers where they'd had a cloud initiative, and for all intents and purposes, it wasn't as successful as they had liked. But many times it's actually a failure. A lot of times we've seen multiple customers where they've gone into the cloud and then they've moved back to their existing architecture, typically like your on-prem environment. So cloud initiatives fail when migration efforts going to the cloud are missed in terms of complexity, right? So you have multi-tenant environments, lots of moving parts, lots of different services. I've seen, especially with some of the folks that do more build versus buy, have a lot of custom components. They want to move it into the cloud, but there isn't necessarily a like for like match on what's happening from within the cloud itself. But they still move forward with the cloud and try to make it work. And ultimately, lots of significant man hours wasted, they may make it to the cloud, but performance may have taken a hit. Lots of challenges when you don't really take the time to dig deep and really understand your workloads and really understand the architectures and what's there to support it. And so that's hurt many cloud initiatives for some organizations. Another no-no that I see is we see a lot of folks where they will do a lift and shift model, where they will come in and mimic close to exact of what they have from within their on-prem environment. This is a little caveat. I wouldn't say that this is a bad practice, but if that is your cloud architecture, is to basically mimic what you have from within your on-prem environment, you're not taking advantages of the compute elasticity. You're not taking advantage of separation of compute and store. And so, generally speaking, for customers who have really done the math and actually start breaking down, hey, how much does it cost in my cloud, which is pretty straightforward what that cost is. But then when I compare it to, I've got my hardware costs, and maybe I have a data center, I have a personnel that looks into it. A lot of times when you do the math, going into the cloud doesn't necessarily equate to being cheaper. And so, again, for folks that are moving and just recreating what they had done from on-prem, if that's your final state, I've seen that fail for customers. Now, on the flip side, I've also seen this architecture of lift and shift for customers that need to get into the cloud first because maybe they're sunsetting hardware, but ultimately they're going to re-architect their cloud architecture to work with some more of the cloud native services like your Amazon EMR or like a Databricks or even like a Snowflake. And so, I've seen that pattern and that's worked successfully too. But folks who typically just try to copy what they had on-prem, it's not the most optimal. We've also seen cloud initiatives fail when resource wastage goes unchecked. And so this is always something that customers, when they first come into the cloud, especially like the developers, where when I'm in my on-prem environment and I'm using hardware resourcing, it's a sunk cost, right? And so if applications are failing, applications need to be repeated, so on and so forth, or maybe like your Spark developer is asking for 50% more resources than they really needed for their Spark job. Yes, there's definitely a hit there, but it's a sunk cost, right? For the most part, it's wasted time. When you move into a cloud model, all that changes, right? Any failed job, you're paying for. Resources that are being over allocated, say for example, in like a Databricks environment, you're using beefy, hefty nodes, but your job is really small. That's over allocation, right? And you're paying for all of that. And what ends up happening is, the inevitable sticker shock. I was sold it was going to cost this much, and I didn't realize that it was costing me, exponentially more, or whatever it may be. And so not having a handle on just checking to see how resources are being used ends up being a very sore, leaving a sore note on the folks that are actually funding, the cloud bill. And finally, and most importantly, end user expectations are not met. So with all the advantages that the cloud brings, there's also, slight caveats. Just like there's some gotchas from within your on-prem environment in terms of things you need to be, that you need to consider. It goes on the flip side in the cloud, right? One example is because especially depending on the storage layer, you've got many choices, whether that be, say, for example, like Microsoft, you have a WASB layer, which is, your standard storage layer. They've got ADLS, which is their data lake store, or ADLS of Gen 2. Lots of different data stores, lots of different implications, but choosing the wrong one means performance implications, right? I mean, if you pick WASB, which is their standard, which is not necessarily optimal for big data storage layer, there's going to be performance on your queries. And so where end users come in and they expect, like, you're changing the architecture on them. So they're expecting if not faster performance from within the cloud. And if they don't get it, or even worse, things are just failing even more, or just like are a lot slower in the on-prem environment, they're going to have their push to go back to the previous architecture. And so all that time and money wasted going into the cloud, it goes wasted. So, these are some things that we want to be cognizant of when we're thinking about, the type of cloud and the type of vendor that we want, the type of services, so on and so forth. So now let's get more prescriptive here. So say we're now in the state of, okay, we understand the pros, we understand some of the cons. Now let's start exploring some of your cloud options from an architecture perspective, right? So for today, we're going to be talking about two types of architectures that obviously are cloud-centric, because that's our discussion of topic for today. But we'll first start off with your hybrid environment. And what I mean by that is you've got an on-prem cluster that you're managing today, and you want to start using some of those cloud components, whether that be your Microsoft, your Amazon, et cetera, and so forth. And so this hybrid option of managing both your on-prem and your cloud, it's going to be best for customers that already have an existing and an ongoing on-prem environment, right? So I was working for a large financial firm in the East Coast of the US, where they had just purchased a significant amount of hardware, and there were some more changes. The new CIO wanted to go into the cloud, but obviously there was a significant investment on hardware, right? So it was going to be a phase approach. So this hybrid model is going to be is going to be very beneficial for those type of scenarios where I have an on-prem environment. I may be going into the cloud, and I might become cloud native in the next coming years, but I still need to support my on-prem environment. Hybrid solutions like Cloudera Data Platform are going to be very well suited for those type of scenarios. Another one is for you have your critical use cases that are running on-prem today, but you want to take advantage of some of the things that cloud native technologies such as like your Snowflakes and your Databricks bring to the table, but you're not ready to 100% invest all in on the cloud. And so again, Cloudera Data Platform is a very, very robust choice for those type of hybrid environments, because you can actually use the Cloudera framework to essentially pick and choose which workloads you want to move up to the cloud. So again, the data scientist example, if I have very thirsty workloads, but I don't want to add more nodes onto my existing cluster, well then let's go move those guys into the cloud, have them burst away. I don't need to add additional hardware. And so, that's best for folks that have that type of model. And finally, and this is a important subject for a lot of customers, especially larger enterprise organizations, is, hey, your data is most important. You need to make sure that it is locked down, tied, et cetera, and so forth. Again, platforms like Cloudera, CDP, Cloudera Data Platform, they have a lot of this, a lot of these robust features built into the product itself, and they've been doing it for a number of years, right? So think about if you want to track data lineage, you want to lock down data, either on the column level, on the row level. I want to be able to have audit logs and really understand where the data is going, et cetera, and so forth. Cloudera has been doing it for years, and so you'll still get that same consistent, products that you get in terms of securing your data and understanding data lineage, et cetera, and so forth, with a product like CDP. Whereas in the cloud side, it's not as mature in terms of locking some of that stuff down, at least not out of the box. And so if you have very stringent data requirements, a hybrid environment, leveraging something like a Cloudera Data Platform is going to really make sense to stick with. Now, if you've decided you want to go with hybrid, some of the benefits, just from a implementation standpoint, is less migration effort, right? We talked about, you've got all these cloud native technologies that are out there, whether that be your Amazon, your EMR, or like a Databricks, either on Microsoft or Amazon. If I'm using like a platform like CDP, it's I don't really have to change as much. It's just pointing out which workloads that I want in the cloud, and I now they're in the cloud. So in terms of like re-architecting, I don't have to worry about that too much. Again, sending specific workloads to the cloud. Again, that bursty workload use case that I was using, it's something that you can now take advantage of, right? So and then also the familiarity of like your stack, so like your CDP, but in any cloud, right? So I'm the one thing that CDP brings to the table is, hey, we've got a suite for your enterprise data warehouse workloads. We've got a suite for your data science workloads, and so instead of me trying to choose which vendor I would want to have that host, whether that be any of the major cloud providers out there, I can pick and choose anyone that I want, and CDP will handle that for me. So again, a very beneficial way of not being locked in on a specific vendor, and having a familiar tool actually manage this. So enabling you to get into getting your feet wet into the cloud, or just adding additional new workloads into the cloud itself. Platforms like CDP really allow and enable you to make those decisions. Things to consider though. So because we're on-prem and in the cloud, you do need to keep in mind that there's going to be multiple data lakes, right? So they try to make it as simple as possible, but there's data movement involved, et cetera, and so forth. And so just being cognizant of having multiple environments and managing where that data stays, so on and so forth, is something that you should be cognizant of. Again, you can take this as you will, but if you're using Cloudera as a CDP data platform, you're still in the CDP space, right? So you're going to be still relying on them to support your EDW workloads, your data science workloads, et cetera, and so forth. So there's some benefits to that, but then also, hey, if you have initiatives in your organization to try to be vendor agnostic as much as possible, something to consider. So, so that wraps up some of the pros and cons from the hybrid side. Now let's talk about cloud and multi-cloud, right? So, the options that are out there today, I love it. There's whatever type of analysis that you want to do, the cloud really enables that, right? Whether that be your NLP, your machine learning, or even just more of just the dynamic nature of like data warehousing that like Snowflake brings, or like the using Spark and in a managed service with Databricks is very, very attractive, very, very powerful. In fact, it really enables a lot of organizations that are going their first foray into big data to, let's skip that whole on-prem side. Let's go right into the cloud. And so where you're going to see cloud and multi-cloud type of architectures really resonate is for customers starting their big data journey in the cloud. So maybe they missed the boat of trying to do this on-prem, and so like the barrier to entry obviously is not as significant. So I don't have to spend millions of dollars to just to get started. I can just click I can just spin something up and start working on my use cases. There's no requirement to keep if you have no requirement to keep data on-prem, then this is going to be a good solution for you. Pretty straightforward, because we won't have an on-prem component. But this really kind of talks about, hey, there's going to be folks that are going to be hesitant to be putting any kind of data in the cloud. And then you're going to have folks that embrace that. Maybe they're, a mobile technology that's all their data is. It's all stored from the cloud. It's collected in the cloud, stored in the cloud. And so like, if you have no requirement because of security reasons, compliance reasons to keep anything on-prem, then yes, cloud and multi-cloud is going to be a good solution for you. And then finally, most of your use cases, again, are very cloud-driven. Obviously, you're going to want to go towards more of a cloud architecture than trying to keep this on-prem. Again, benefits, no upfront infrastructure costs. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, right? I, as an IT admin, can easily sign up for AWS, put in my credit card, and if I want to spin up a 100 node, Elastic MapReduce engine within Amazon and then spin it down within an hour, hey, I can do it. Something that was not even fathomable from within the on-prem days. So just being able to just do it is very, very easy. And also too, from a DevOps perspective, I can start writing scripts, whether that be Terraform, Ansible, what have you, and really get automated. So that way we are really, having this very elastic, very, as much as, moving up, spinning up and spinning down as my resources and are being asked for becomes very, very beneficial. Obviously, the easy button for deploying big data solutions, I kind of talked about this just now, but hey, I can come in again, click a few buttons, run one script, have everything up and running. As soon as I'm done, run the script again, destroy everything. Everything still stays in the compute layer. Very, very attractive, right? And so for folks that are trying to be very cost conscious and really only using the resources that they need, that's a huge benefit for each of the clouds. And then again, never run out of resources, right? We're not bound by the hardware that we have. And so as we're running these things, making sure that, never running out of resources it's not a thing anymore. The flip side of that is obviously you'll be paying for the elasticity of that compute. But hey, if you have business critical functions that always need to be up and always need to be able to scale up on demand, that's a huge benefit from within the cloud itself. So some things to consider, even in the cloud. So I've been painting the cloud as this euphoric solution, but there are things you need to consider, right? Higher migration effort for existing on-prem workloads, right? So again, I'm sure I'm talking to some folks that have a footprint and maybe you don't have a footprint on-prem, but for the folks that do, when you're thinking about migrating, your products that are being supported by big data applications, you really need to start thinking about architecting, right? Again, I started off about the pitfalls. You don't want to just create the same wheel up in the cloud. And so there's some thought process there and there's some planning, et cetera, and so forth. We'll talk about that shortly, but there's going to be that higher migration effort to map to the specific cloud services. Here's another important one. So understanding how each tech stack plays with each of the providers. If you start on just even from a services component. So think of like your Databricks and your Snowflake. Snowflake's great for that's your BI, OLAP, those type of use cases, interactive use cases. And then you've got Databricks, which is very great for Spark, machine learning, even some batch processes, et cetera, and so forth. But if you want these guys to connect and talk to each other, they don't make that easy. So, and furthermore, if you have in a multi-cloud environment, different services talking to each other, there's going to be a cost. There's going to be some delay to that. And so just really understanding how these different tech providers, how are they managing your data? Like, are they expecting you to, reload up all your data into their data lake so then they can do their analysis? If that's the case, that's another data copy that you need to worry about. And then if I want to actually commingle some of that data, like what's the best way to do it? Maybe I want to run Spark workloads on the data that I have in my Snowflake data lake. What are the implications of that, right? So there's obviously a cost component to that, and even more so, where the different regions are between the different cloud providers. I mean, these are all new things that you need to start hashing out. But again, things to consider when you're thinking cloud. We talked about this before, but this is, again, it's a huge point that a lot of customers, they get sold on the cloud, but then once they start seeing their cloud bill exponentially increase month over month, you need to be wary that this is going to happen, and how can you steps to mitigate that. So again, you've got that pay-as-you-go model where it's great that I can spin things up and spin things down, but there's still wastage, right? Like I said, if things are failing, you have poorly written code and it continues to fail, you got to rerun those, and every time you rerun it, you're going to pay for it. Again, that over allocation of resources, even on the developer end, right? I'm running my Spark apps, and I'm just using the beefiest node because I know that my application will never fail when using the beefiest node. And maybe Databricks is auto scaling these things and ensuring, but it's not going. That auto scaling feature is great when you're looking at in the context of like VM instances, the number of nodes. But if you actually want to go down even further and really understand, like, am I actually using the 128 gigs of memory on this particular node? The visibility stops there. And so that's where it becomes very, there needs to be some places in check for your developers to kind of look into that and make sure that they're not just wasting resources on the application level. And then finally, understanding the need, of the data movement between cloud providers. So as you guys know, there's this movement of being able to understand, I want to be cloud agnostic because I've been burnt in the past by being, locked in on a particular vendor. So I want to go ahead and build my solution so that, I can go and pick Microsoft one day and Google the other day. Great. That's a great, methodology to be thinking about. But then you also have to consider, if you are using multi-cloud, there's going to be an impact in terms of the cost that you pay for ingress and egress of data, especially to different cloud providers, because ultimately these cloud providers, it's not in their best interest for these folks to be moving data outside of their cloud, right? And so you're going to pay for that if you're going to have that model. So again, things to think about. I mean, there's pros and cons of all this stuff, but there's also some things that you'll want to hash out, so that way you're making the right decisions when you're choosing the type of either hybrid or cloud or multi-cloud architecture from itself. And so moving along. So we talked about the pitfalls, the great things that I've seen where customers were successful, where customers had failed. We had talked about, hey, some of the architecture. Now let's get a little bit more prescriptive here. So say I'm at that state, I'm ready to move into the cloud. I think that either hybrid is going to be my best use case. My pure cloud play is going to be my best use case. The next thing you need to start thinking about is coming up with a prescriptive plan. And so this is a 3-step plan that I work with my customers and I guide them through this journey. But the way to think about this is, the first step here is really discovering how your resources are being used from within your existing environments. Now, mind you, for folks that are going to go right in the cloud, you may skip steps 1 and 2 and go right to 3. But for your folks that have on-prem environments today, this is going to be very valuable for you. So that first step is really spending the time to understand, what's going on with your workloads, and talking with your folks and really understand that relationship of these are my data pipelines questions. These are the data sets that it touches. What are the ones that are bursty? Because they can go and do bursty, go through that bursty architecture. Or these are my strictly batch jobs that run 24/7, hot all the time. Maybe these guys can stay on-prem, or I've got some, critical BI dashboards that data needs to stay on-prem. Like, you need to understand all this stuff, because if you don't understand how your resources are being used, then you really can't make wise decisions in terms of the types of services that you want to use in the cloud. So generally speaking, this effort takes customers a week, 2 weeks to go down this. And it's a very manual process of, I have a preset questionnaire of asking these questions, making sure that I ultimately understand high critical workloads, the impact to the business, et cetera, and so forth, to get that lay of the land. The next thing you want to do once you have that figured out is to really map your workloads. And then so now that you have kind of a game plan of where you want to go, the services that you're going to use, the cloud vendor that you're going to choose, now you got to start thinking about, like, how am I going to get this in here? And so what I'll work with customers is we'll do it in a phased approach. So phase one may be, I'm going to take your most critical use cases. It touches these 3 tables. And so if I bring up, this can actually handle 40%, 50% of the workloads that I have in my environment today, moving these guys to Databricks. And then maybe these other ones, I'm going to continue using Cloudera Data Platform. I'll use the workload manager to spin up and down maybe some of these these very long running queries that I don't want to continue adding more nodes on. It's like, those are the things you need to map out in a phased approach, so that way you can quickly and efficiently get folks and workloads to the cloud that you choose. Generally speaking, this takes a matter of weeks to sometimes months to figure this out. But again, getting down, if you can get down to that data level, down to the application level, down to all of that nitty-gritty, it takes a lot of work, but it can be done. But with that, then you have a very clear and concise plan on where you need to go next, and actually start doing that deployment itself. And it doesn't stop there. Once we're actually in that cloud that we choose, whether that be your EMR, your Databricks, et cetera, and so forth, this is an important step. I need to make sure that when I'm in there, I'm running optimally and performant as possible. Because again, like I was saying, that end user experience, very, very key. Where a lot of folks, really spend the time and resources to get 1 and 2, but once they're in the cloud, don't really think too much about making sure and comparing that application is still being performant in the cloud itself. And so this becomes very, very important. And this is where I highly suggest using some sort of APM tool to get there, and making sure that you're having ultimate customer satisfaction here. So generally speaking, I mean, if you look at this, typically when you're doing this manually, we're talking a few months to get this here, with some room for room for error, because a lot of this stuff is manual. But what if I told you there's a tool that can automate this whole entire process? And so there is a tool. It's called Unravel. And so I'll just spend a few minutes here. I didn't want this to be a product pitch too much, but I do want to at least help show how I'm able to accelerate this the cloud journey for a lot of customers, right? And so from within this Unravel interface itself, this migration, this cluster discovery report here, this is going to help you with that first stage, right? Really understanding the type of workloads that are coming in, really understanding the CPU and the memory from like a compute standpoint on how much is actually being used. We got a heat map here that really highlights essentially, hey, is this a bursty workload? If this is, then I might want to move this to a more elastic type model. And so what this tool does is it's actually analyzing all the way down to that application level. So it's giving you a rich data set to really understand how things are actually going to be used. And then I can actually start, figuring out the services and technologies that I would want to use. So high level, this is my workload discovery, understand how the actual cluster is being used based on actual usage. And by the way, this only takes a few days to populate. So we're reducing that time from 2 weeks of just kind of pre-planning down to a few days. That's step 2 that I was talking about. Now that I've got a plan and I kind of have an idea of the vendor that I'm going to be going to, now let's actually start thinking about taking out this and slicing, dicing the specific workloads, right? So, I've been using this data science workload a lot for, my talk check here pretty often. But say, for example, I only care about my engineering jobs. And so if I go and actually run this heat map here, I can actually go ahead and see, hey, what is this? 7 days a week, 24 by hours. And again, this is a very bursty workload. So it looks like my data scientists are coming here. It looks like earlier in the day, and then towards the end, it starts fizzling out. So hey, having a more elastic model like a Databricks makes sense for this, right? And so this helps really start slicing and dicing which type of workloads that we want to move in, but it doesn't end there. On the bottom here is where we do some specific scenarios. So if if I had already chosen maybe Azure is going to be my stack, I can go in and start picking different scenarios, right? So Databricks from Azure, or even HD Insight. I apologize for the Google folks. We do also fully support Google, so I apologize not name dropping their name too much. But doing a data proc, or maybe even doing just IaaS from there, it's giving scenarios, and then maybe even going down even further, going into the region, selecting the nodes that you may want to pick. I'm sure for your larger enterprise organizations, folks that are on the call today, if I want to actually give some custom costs, because hey, these cloud vendors have given me custom costs, I can go ahead and put that in there. And then when I run that, that's when I get into this interface here. And now I can start giving that scenario based. So my data science workloads, if I want to make 100% of the SLAs, meaning that these are production, like I can't see any degradation in performance, here's that estimated cost. So very, very important, right? Getting ahead of sticker shock, and then getting your recommendations here. Even all the way down to like, hey, 80% SLA. It's my experimental. I don't care if 20% of my applications get impacted. They're a little bit slower, but I can get that. If you look at that, $281 here down to $46. Pretty significant. So depending on your tolerance for SLAs, that's a way to help in terms of cost. And then also auto scaling, right? Again, just using the benefits of the cloud. What this is showing here is if I had that full, using 100% of the SLAs, I was getting $282. But if I were to follow this algorithm in terms of auto scaling based on the actual patterns that is based on actual usage data today, I can really bring that down to a little bit over half, right? So this becomes very beneficial, again, for just really understanding, creating that implementation plan, and ultimately coming up with a level of effort to get you into the cloud as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. Finally, once we're in the cloud, providing an APM solution to really understand what's going on down to that application level is crucially important. One of the things that Unravel brings to this table is that application view, right? So I can be self-service, get all the information that I need in terms of my application itself, and then ultimately get those recommendations so I can be more proactive and look and see, hey, like I had just talked about before, like Databricks will give you auto scaling features, but if you need to get down to the code and the configuration level, that's where a tool like an Unravel comes into place, where that's our bread and butter, providing that APM to get down to that application and really show you, this is why it failed, this is why it's slow. And most importantly, here are some proactive things that you can do, either from a configuration standpoint, but then also as just a root cause analysis of things that, sometimes there's instances like with DataSkew that configurations can't fix itself. And so being able to see that here and giving it to you gives you that full experience, right? And ultimately, you follow these three components, this will definitely set you up for success once you actually start going into your cloud journey itself. So last thing here, guys. So went through a lot of things, but as all these different scenarios, hopefully I've given you an insight as to, hey, what is cloud right for me? Which vendor do I need to go to? What are the pros and cons under the different architectures? I'll leave you with this. So key takeaways. So where I've seen customers truly enable success for their organizations, moving forward is, anticipate that technology will change. There's lots of great technology out there, but there's new technologies that are being introduced every day that can overtake those technologies. So whatever stack that you decide to create today, you need to architect it in a way that this could potentially change, not even just from a stack perspective, but also from a just maybe even just changing either on-prem to back into the cloud, or cloud back to on-prem, or even just changing cloud providers itself. There's never anything constant. You always got to take that advantage. And for folks that can do that, really can, mitigate their risk when architectural or services change. You also want to make your applications portable as much as possible. The cloud providers are going to hate me for saying this, but if you bet all of your money and time and effort into Databricks, and then maybe your future, boss, the CIO comes in, new direction from within the organization, and they don't want to go to Microsoft anymore, they want to go to Google. That's a major architectural change, right? And so you need to keep being able to use the specific native services. You just need to be cognizant that let's not put everything in one basket, and just know that these services are going to come and change. So just always be on the lookout to try to make your applications to be portable as possible. So that way, ultimately, you could bring this back on-prem or change cloud providers with minimal impact. So being able to see that is really going to future-proof your technology. The cloud decisions based on actual data. Again, I can't stress this enough. I was working with one of the cloud vendors where we were working on an implementation plan, originally quoted for about $1 million, didn't realize the complexity of the migration efforts, ended up being an $8 million effort. Nobody was happy about it. And so really to mitigate that risk is you have to get your hands dirty, really understand down to that application level, down to the use case level. What are the SLAs that need to be met? You need to answer all these questions, because that's ultimately going to make you create a definitive implementation plan that is going to essentially mitigate your risk, but then also be efficient in getting you into whatever cloud decision that you so choose. And then finally, just like anything, you always want to make sure your applications, whether that be on-prem, hybrid, cloud native, want to make sure that they're always running optimal with an APM tool. I'm gonna be biased, guys. I work at an APM company, Unravel Data, where we specialize on providing application performance management on the big data space. I'll leave this with an analogy for you guys. For folks that have worked on the web tier and you're creating, production web tier apps, you wouldn't go into market without like an App Dynamics or like a New Relic. I mean, you would be flying completely blind if you didn't do that. Why not have that same approach from within a big data aspect? So very, very important. And you always want to make sure that you are, covering that from within your, with whatever decisions that you make from within the cloud itself. That said, I will open it up for questions from the audience.
Oh, hi, Chris. It's Andy back again.
Hey, Andy.
I just wanted to let the audience know firstly that if you missed any of Chris's presentation, maybe you missed the beginning or something, logged in late, these presentations are made available on demand almost instantly, so you can surf straight back in and catch the bit that you're looking for, or indeed if you want to go over a bit from earlier in the presentation again, you can do that at will. Pretty much as soon as this session is finished, just go to the relevant Bright Talk channel. I've got a couple of questions for you, Chris, before we wrap this up, if that's okay. I was going to say, you talked about the size of company. Bigger companies may be looking at hybrid cloud as a solution. Is there any sectors? Is there any use cases? Particular sectors or something that might find that approach or pure play cloud approach more attractive, or is it more kind of a size thing?
Yes, I mean, with enterprise customers, also depending on the vertical that they're in, they tend to be a little bit slower in the cloud adoption. Now, I mean, if I had my crystal ball in front of me, I think that is going to be changing very soon. And so larger organizations are going to generally embrace this hybrid model. I mean, if you think about it, especially say, for example, financial, there's so many regulations, compliance, et cetera, and so forth, just to get to the cloud. And a lot of times, do your due diligence. Does the cloud provider that you're deciding to move to, are they compliant in the all the regulatory compliance that exists in your organization itself? And so so there's that. And by the way, to the cloud provider's credit, I mean, they've definitely stepped up on it. It's a lot better than what it was like in years past. So what you're going to see for larger organizations, at least what I'm seeing, your mileage may vary, but they'll gravitate more towards a hybrid environment because they've spent significant time and energy and resources on their on-prem environment. So hybrid's going to make more sense for them. And then I've also seen a lot of folks, larger enterprises too, where hey, we don't, we evaluated all the risks, and just going straight pure cloud play makes sense for them. And so again, it's really doing that due diligence and making sure that from a compliance, security, and even just from an architecture perspective, is this not only going to meet what I would do from an on-prem environment, but it's going to exceed. Maybe I'm a multi-regional service that's not tied to just to the UK. I need to be able to support in real time the US and Asia Pac markets. Those type of architectures are going to gravitate for those type of customers.
Cool, thank you. And then where's the trend going? Would you say, are more people jumping on hybrid cloud in the last year or so, or do you feel it's the other way around? More people are thinking they may as well go the whole hog and go fully cloud?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I want to say a hybrid right now is very popular today, because a lot of folks, especially have been doing big data workloads for a long time. They're not ready, or they're. I'm making a blanket statement here. Obviously, there's definitely differences, but hybrid is very, very popular right now because I'm not willing to just forfeit the investments, time, and energy that I've made in an on-prem, with on-prem. And so I see that hot topic today. Now, in the future, I can see that changing. So what you're seeing right now is you're seeing a lot of organizations where they've always been adverse to the cloud. I mean, I'm speaking financial. I'll use that as an example where they were never going to entertain the cloud for the foreseeable future. But now, I want to say every single financial organization. So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. I am US based, so most of my customers are in the US. Although I do support a lot of the financial organizations in the UK as well. But they're starting to open up with actually using the cloud for some use cases in a hybrid environment, right? And a lot of that has to do too with just peers, right? That they see that their competition is moving into the cloud, they're having successful cloud products. I mean, it's just like any industry, right? So today, hybrid, very, very popular, but I can very, very much see in the coming years that pure cloud play is definitely going to start overtaking big data uses, primarily because of all the technological advances that the cloud brings that you're semi-limited to from within an on-prem environment.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. We've got a question about what technologies Unravel supports. Is there somewhere you could point that person online? Is there a resource on the Unravel website or something which shows all the sort of tech partnerships and tech supporting things that you do?
Yeah, great question. So unraveldata.com is our landing page. I apologize, I don't have the link in front of me, but going in there, you'll be able to find the solutions that we provide. But just very high level for you guys, we cover the whole everything, whether it be your on-prem environment, so your cloud areas, your Hortonworks, your MapR, even your Apache, vanilla Hadoop. We cover that on-prem. We talked about that whole cloud migration journey, and so we have reports specific to help enable you make the best decisions when you are thinking about moving into the cloud. And then when you are in the cloud itself, we have partnerships with all of the three major providers, with Google, with Microsoft, with Amazon, and primarily on the big data space, guys. So I don't want to say there's hundreds of services that these guys provide, but in the realms of big data. So like your Snowflakes, your Databricks, your BigQuery, your DataProc, your HD Insights, your EMR, even IaaS, if you're doing that IaaS route, all of that stuff is fully supported. And again, being able to provide that end-to-end APM interface to ensure that your applications are running efficiently and smoothly is something that we cover, and would 100% love to have that conversation with you folks if you're interested.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. So apologies for any questions that we didn't get to. I'm just going to leave with one final question for Chris before we wrap this up. We're talking about people sort of starting cloud journeys, and it's pretty clear for most that there's efficiency gains and cost savings and this kind of stuff that can be kind of leveraged with cloud. For anybody who's still standing on the edge, as it were, kind of staring over the precipice, not ready to commit to this kind of journey, have you got one piece of advice or one bit of encouragement to get them kick-started, perhaps?
Yeah, guys, the cloud is the future. I mean, if anything, go in and just high level understand the lay of the land. I know it's a huge undertaking because there's a lot of stuff that's out there, but that's where the industry is going, guys. I mean, if you on-prem will be here for some time, but your new workloads, your new use cases, just the way the industry is going. I mean, even if you think about all the companies that are doing analysis, for example, for COVID, right? I mean, all that stuff is being powered by the cloud, because being able to just do computation on loads and loads of data, like there's that would be a lot of money if you were trying to do that on-prem. So whereas on-prem is still here and will be here for a foreseeable future, the cloud is definitely here to stay, if not getting better and better. So for folks that are starting to come in there and starting to even just do their cloud journey, myself, but also the company that I work with, these are the conversations that we do day in, day out. So would definitely love to have those initial discussions, even if it's more from a consultative capacity. But when you're ready to actually move and start implementing, hey, what's the best path for me to not only ensure efficiency on that migration path, but then ultimately ensuring I made the right decisions in the cloud, definitely talk to me.
Perfect. Well, we look forward and definitely get in touch with Chris for any conversations like that. So just finally, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Chris Santiago for presenting. You might have guessed, but he's joined us from the States today, from Chicago. So early start for him, and it's thank you for putting so much energy and and effort into the presentation so early in the morning for you. So with that, we'd just like to say goodbye. Thanks for logging on again, and we'll see you next time at Big Data London webinar. Thanks, Chris. Great. See you soon.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Andy. Thank you.